Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, I'm Lu, and I'm the host of Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast. And this time I'm back with a different kind of content. So you might be wondering what it is. And I'm here to tell you that we have journeyed together through 8 episodes of the podcast, which represent 8 elements of the happiness science framework. And you know what? The end of the year is here. It's December. So here we are, and we want to do something different for you this time around, especially because the holidays are approaching. I'm sure a lot of us are reflecting, and we are doing that too. So here's a recap of our first 8 episodes, and please stay tuned for a special announcement at the end. So as we remember, we began the show with Dr. Michael Bernard, and we actually had him in the studio. You know, we had a really great time just chatting to him in person, and he actually walked us through the strength of self-acceptance. To me, it was kind of like, a somewhat uncomfortable topic to talk about. And even though I've been on this journey for a couple of years now, it's still really new to be able to learn about self-doubt, to learn not to internalize what other people think about us, and to be able to accept myself fully as I am. Unconditional acceptance is something that's really new to me, especially when the episode was recorded. But I think the practice that Michael recommended, which was about saying affirmation to ourselves on the daily, that was really helpful. And I got to practice it during the episode as well. So it was kind of uncomfortable, but I think for me, it was also really powerful. And I think being able to say things like, I accept myself no matter what, that is really powerful if we can actually keep that consistent. Like, I have to admit, it hasn't been consistent for me, but still, it was a really, really good practice. And we would highly recommend it if you haven't tried it before. So in the second episode of the podcast, I had the chance to talk to Penny Locaso. Penny's energy was really amazing, and we actually got to talk about future self. What I remember the most about that episode was about understanding that we need to work on our current self so that we can build our future self. I think this is something that oftentimes get overlooked. And I think Penny really pointed out that we need to put our efforts into, trying to do new things, seeing fear as something that is good for us and not necessarily something that should push us back, because that's healthy fear if it's not detrimental to us, if it's not life-threatening or anything like that. And for the practice part, she pointed out that we can try several things, and, it's nothing new to us, like meditation, journaling. I love that she mentioned learning, for 15 minutes in the morning. And my personal favorite amongst this is setting daily intention in the morning. So next up on episode 3, I got to talk to Corey Jackson about negative emotions. While many of us try to avoid negative emotions, what I learned from Corey is that these negative emotions are signposts, and they're very important to us. We actually need to pay attention to them more in our daily lives, because they are necessary and crucial to our survival and growth in life. And a practice that he recommended was daily mindfulness practice. And, this can look different for different people, but the most important thing is to not turn on our phone first thing in the morning if we can, and, try to have present moment, being surrounded by things rather than, digital devices. So that is episode 3. And in episode 4, I got to interview Dr. Tim Sharp, whose work I've been following for a number of years now, ever since I moved to Australia. And it was just so surreal that I got to interview him. And we talked about positive psychology and the habits of happiness. He actually, authored a couple of series under the similar name. And yeah, they're great. But the key point of that conversation was to build habits for our happiness in ways that work for us, because something that works for myself wouldn't work for you. And for Tim, it could be similar things like exercising daily, meditating. But, for yourself, it can be something very different. And the practice is to actually identify things that would make you happy and definitely keep up doing that on the daily. And in the next episode, I got to interview Dr. Essam Daod. He is an expert in children's negative emotions, and we got to talk about this in more granularity, because in a previous episode, we had already talked about negative emotions, but that was generic and mainly for adults. For this one, we talked about children, and I found that to be very fascinating because I'm not a parent myself yet, but I'm surrounded by children. I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and I think and I noticed that we as adults need to understand it so we can help children to understand that themselves, especially to regulate and navigate through the negative emotions. What is interesting that he talked about was the fact that we shouldn't be the one giving them the solution, but it's more so the children should be the one coming up with the solution themselves, and adults are merely there to guide them and to help them to regulate when it's really hard. And if certain children are really struggling with negative emotions, then we need to have professionals to step in. But I think a really good practice that Essam mentioned that we can try as well is for us, as adults, when we interact with children, to help them to understand and navigate through their negative emotions. We should be the ones to cultivate meaningful interactions. So no devices, and truly pay attention to what they're saying and what they're doing, because oftentimes the signs are missed and we don't really know what's going on, and then that might really easily lead to the fact that they might misbehave, not because they intentionally do so, but only because they don't understand that they are going through some sort of negative emotions they didn't know how to regulate. So I found that to be really good and to keep in mind. And in episode 6, I got to interview Luis Gallardo, and he joined us to talk about flow and happiness. Now, flow was not a new concept to me, but through this conversation, I really understood the science behind it. And I got to understand the experts that made it happen as well. I think what's very important to me is he talked about the importance of flow when it comes to bringing us self-regulation, balance, a state of calm. And, with all of that, we can actually become more creative, more engaged in what we're doing, be really aware and mindful. And to me, that's super important nowadays, because I've, really struggled to get into the state of flow myself. And he actually recommended trying several practices. And I think this is based on his personal experience, like cycling, reading, listening to music. But he also said that you can try anything that's related to what you enjoy doing. It doesn't have to be cycling or, listening to music. It can be something else entirely. But as long as we can cultivate that flow state where we're totally immersed in that experience and activity, that's all that matters. And in episode 7, I got to talk to Lison Mage about overthinking. And of course, overthinking and happiness, they're kind of, weird together. But actually, according to Lison's research, overthinking can affect our happiness. And the reason is because we normally dwell on our problems. And for us to be able to minimize that overthinking, or, at one point stop overthinking, is actually really good to take a step back and shift our focus so we can think about other things and actually come up with solutions. We might not be able to come up with solutions in that moment when we're, stuck in the loop of overthinking, but when we take a step back, we can actually do that. And a practice that she recommended, and actually multiple practices, would be to cultivate healthy living habits. And this is something that you need to do on the daily, like getting enough sleep, I've been struggling with this myself, so I understand how important it is. We need to have healthy meals, so, really eat well and exercise well. So 3 fundamental things that all humans should do. But of course, when it comes time, when you're busy, it's really hard to do that. And we all know that we can get sucked into things and we just don't do it. So this is a really good but also challenging practice, even though it sounds really simple. And I really enjoyed that conversation. And I believe that Lison has also released a book on overthinking recently. So definitely check it out. And in episode 8, the most recent one that we've released, Langley joined us to talk about the science behind emotional intelligence. I believe that we all know the word and we've all sort of gone through some tests before. But what was interesting from that conversation was emotions are data and they're information to tell us what is going on so that we can actually understand ourselves and understand others. It is very important for us to understand different kinds of emotion. And I think this gets repeated, quite a bit in our show already. So the most important thing for us to do is to actually curate a really granular vocabulary when it comes to emotions. And she also recommended us to, try and stop in the moment when we are feeling like we're encountering a certain kind of emotions and we're not used to it, or we're really struggling, taking a pause there and try to understand the triggers or notice the trigger would really help us. This is not only valuable for yourself in understanding how you're going to deal with your emotion, but also that's going to allow you to, interact with people more meaningfully because we tend to have our triggers and, the loop gets repeated a lot. So those are the ones that I've recapped from our 8 episodes so far. I really enjoy all of the conversations. And I think, whether you're new here or, you've been with us for a while, we truly thank you for spending your time with us. And I think it's really valuable to have your support. Since it's the holiday, here's the twist. We are going to stop podcasting for a while, only to release a limited series. And in this limited series, I'm actually going to try one of the practices myself for 4 weeks and see the impact that it has on my level of happiness. And I kind of dropped a hint earlier, but the practice that I really, really wanted to try is actually to set daily intention in the morning. So yeah, stay tuned and, find out how it's going to be. I'm excited to do that. And thank you so much for listening, for tuning in, for supporting us this year. And we hope to have your support in the limited series and also in the next year.
You've been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast, produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.